Добар ден, почитувани, добродојдовте во неделното интервју на Радио Слободна Европа. Гостин оваа недела е Ерика Јоргенсен, економист и лидер на тимот за зелен развој при Светската банка. Ms. Jorgensen, can you give us a brief introduction as to the purpose of your visit?
We're here this week because a very important step forward on the Macedonia Green Growth Program is taking place. This is a program supported by the World Bank along with Sweden and Norway with the government of Macedonia. And this week we're very excited to hear that the government is going to have the first meeting ever of the Council on Sustainable Development. It's a council that was established almost 2 years ago, but the first meeting is going to occur tomorrow. And so that's, I think, we see it as a significant step forward in the government beginning to take on board this important issue of green growth.
What is green growth? How would one define it?
Green growth is a phrase that's becoming very popular, especially in international circles. The United Nations, especially with the Rio +20 conference, which is happening this June, the World Bank, UN Environment Program, OECD, the European Union. Green growth is a phrase that brings together both some old themes and some new ones. So the theme of sustainable development, which has been around for some time, combined with concerns about climate change, all integrated carefully into what's now talked about as green growth. So green growth is really the idea that that economies and nations need to consider sustainability in a very broad sense, meaning the use of natural resources in a sustainable fashion, and that includes the use of, say, the atmosphere. So carbon emissions is another aspect of sustainability, and whether it be carbon emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, whether it be water, whether it be pollution issues. I think all of these sustainable development issues are now pulled together with the focus on growth, with the understanding that it's not greening, it's not environment against income levels, it's the need to combine them.
Macedonia may face extra costs in making that transition to the low emissions economy. What can be done to decrease the shocks, having in mind the present and the past macroeconomic indicators?
The transition is actually a good question. Maybe the first point is that Macedonia, as for all of Europe and actually much of the world, is in a period now, this is a period that we call the global financial crisis. And so almost every country in the world is more concerned about recovery and short-term targets for growth and employment instead of longer-term issues like green growth. But we would say, first of all, this is a topic about the long term. It's something everyone should keep in mind, even as they make these decisions for the shorter term. So it's true, it's not the #1 priority today, but first of all, it's something that needs to be kept in mind as decisions are made today. And second of all, it's something that will emerge ever more strongly going forward as Macedonia's growth rates recover. The second point I would make on this is that it's not a transformation that takes place in one day. And particularly for Macedonia, it's something that we need to start thinking about today, but it will take years of moving in the direction of green. And for Macedonia, compared to, say, a very wealthy country, Germany or France, the transition will be slower, and appropriately so.
We mentioned the crisis. Can the development of the green economy contribute to job creation, a decrease in unemployment?
Well, the question about green jobs is one that is of high interest to governments everywhere. And I think that there are elements of it that really ring true. And the part that I think really rings true is the expectation that with this greening of economies, there are going to be whole new areas of business, whole new sectors that really have extremely strong growth. And within those sectors, there's going to be a real push for innovation and new technologies. Now, what does this mean for a place like Macedonia? I think most importantly, Macedonia needs to be ready to think about what this might mean and be ready for these changes as they come. And it's not that you can predict exactly what it will mean. And some of the readiness is really not that different from otherwise good policies for growth. So a focus on skills for the population, a focus on having a business-friendly regulatory environment, which I know Macedonia has actually made huge strides on, having supportive infrastructure, which is also I know an area of priority for Macedonia. Those things serve the country well, whether it be green growth or regular growth. But if you see the greening of the world as being a kind of shift in emphasis, and in some cases with a big change in prices, for example, energy prices may be much higher going forward, then economies need to be ready to respond to that. So the more resilient, the more flexible, the more efficient an economy is, the better you're going to be able to not just cope with these changes, but take advantage of them and find areas, niches of success.
Economists often comment that Macedonia has a very centralized and diversified production of export goods that lack competitiveness on the foreign markets. Can green growth solve some of these issues?
Well, the lack of diversification is absolutely a weak point of the Macedonian economy. And it actually probably indicates that Macedonia right now is not quite ready for the flexibility that would be needed, particularly for a greening economy. So perhaps green growth can serve as an additional incentive to highlight the importance of progress in these areas.
What about energy supply for business? Local experts comment that renewable sources of energy are no substitute for the more conventional ones. Can this situation compromise the transition to a green economy?
This is absolutely a challenge. The transformation of the power sector is a challenge around the world, and it will be for Macedonia as well. Maybe the first point I would make is that this is not an obligation that Macedonia faces today. As they move towards EU membership, they really need to think about it because, of course, already within the European Union, there are obligations to reduce carbon emissions, which typically means a focus on the power sector. So it's not an obligation today, but it's something that Macedonia should think about. The second point is that the transition will be a gradual one. And maybe what's most important is that when Macedonia makes decisions today, for example, about building a coal-fired power plant, when you build a coal-fired power plant, you're making a commitment for 40 years. That's a long time. So avoiding what we call lock-in in infrastructure, long-lived infrastructure like power plants, you need to at least consider, will the world look different 20 years from now? 20 years from now, will we regret that we made this big investment in a coal-fired power plant? It may not be the decisive factor, but it's something that government policymakers need to be aware of.
The citizens of Macedonia, and this is by layman's views, do not have the environmentally friendly habits of a typical resident of the European Union. So waste is not sorted, there's no recycling. Even you mentioned that the air that we breathe, especially in winter, is very polluted. Can business go green if the population doesn't make an example of living that way?
It's true, it's very important that this awareness in the population is very important to provide kind of feedback to government and support for the directions that government wants to go in. I'm a bit of an optimist on this because I've seen both in my own country in the United States and also watched in Europe as these issues have really come to prominence. And it happens year by year. Now, as you probably well know, in Western Europe, it's quite amazing how important these issues are to average consumers. Every company tries to pitch that they're very green. Why do they do that? Because their customers care. How does it happen? Well, I think it happens bit by bit. The one thing I can say is that not only is it the case that, say, countries in Western Europe, both governments and populations are very focused on this, but maybe quite surprisingly, most large multinational corporations see this as a priority. To me, this is a sign that the world really is moving in this direction. And as Macedonia, as I said, moves closer to Europe, as incomes continue to grow, I predict that 10 years from now, awareness of these issues will be well integrated into the average Macedonian's thinking, and concerns about whether it be recycling in their household, concerns about economizing on electricity, turning off the lights when you leave the room, all these sort of simple actions. I'm thinking about how you get to work in the morning. These things that have become just a part of everyday life and thinking in Western Europe, I predict those too will be part of Macedonians' thinking.
Thank you, Ms. Jorgensen.
Thank you.
Тоа е се за ова издание на неделното интервју на Радио Слободна Европа. Повторна средба за 7 дена.